Job chapter 4 and 5, we see the first of Job's friends. His name is Eliphaz. Eliphaz is from, he's a Temanite, which means he's from Timon. And where is Timon? Yes, nobody knows. Nobody knows where Timon is. Maybe it's a made-up place. No, I don't think so. But, I mean, nobody knows where Timon is, and so it's difficult to know where Eliphaz actually came from. What we do see from this chapter, in chapter 3, Job has lamented. Do you remember that? He has really cursed the day he was conceived. He said some very strong words in terms of coming close to almost being suicidal, but not that much. He realizes, what was the use of being born if this is what life is all about? Now, Job's chapter 3 lament, or even his cry of bewilderment, actually gets to open up the voices of his three friends. Now, before we go into Eliphaz, the first one has the seniority, and then we go from there to Bildad, and then Zophar. I want to say a few things about these friends. I know when we think about Job's three friends, we think of what? What kind of friends? Not very good, isn't it? What does Job call them? Miserable comforters. It is, and you sometimes, I think, if you know of some friends who kind of bring the worst out of you, you tend to think of them, man, you're worse than Job's friends, or you're like Job's friends to me. And you're like, yeah, they're sitting just behind me. No, we have people whom we think like, wow, with friends like these, who needs enemies? So let me remind you a few things about these three men. They have traveled a very long time to come to be with Job. They love Job. They put a lot of time, energy, and effort to be with Job. Until this chapter, they have simply sat and shared Job's experience on this heap outside the city, maybe the garbage dump, you may say, the ash heap. They have actually sat in silence. When they first see their friend Job, they are shocked. They don't know what to say. They don't even recognize him. He was so marred or disfigured with his physical suffering. Because there he was, whatever this disease he had got, I don't know, some form of, the worst form of leprosy, or maybe AIDS, we would say today, and the pus is just flowing out. He's somehow found a piece of pottery, and he's just scraping the pus out of his skin, and you can see how gruesome that is. And these friends just sit with him. They also rent their clothes, and they do the formality of being totally, just broken and wailing with him. So don't forget that this has happened so far. We can quickly say, man, these guys are insensitive. We're going to see that theology is a bit problematic. They are not really helping him in several areas. But let's not forget they were there. There are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions but are not there. A friend, and our theme, by the way, has been threefold. We've been looking first and foremost in this whole section about themes is the theme of suffering or human frailty. Existence, as it were, as Job will confess, is full of suffering. And this existential need brings out not only the brevity of life, but also the frailty of the human body. And it's good for us now and then to remember we are but dust, and we were created by that. The second theme we're looking at is God's sovereignty or faithfulness to his character. That's not changing. That's the constant part. There's a lot of things that hit Job and change his opinion about many things. There's one thing he does not lose so far, and that's his integrity to himself and his faith and fear of God. Faith in God, fear for God. And I think that's commendable. Whatever comes from now on, we must remember this about Job. Of course, we are transitioning now to what I call the impatience of Job. We always know about the patience of Job from James and how he quotes him. But now we're going to see he's very impatient, and that's going to show forth in many ways. But the take that we are having in this class that I'm kind of drawing out is basically, if I remind you that I'm writing something for Word of Life Bible Institute, and this is my commentary that I'm thinking through. So I'm looking at the theme of friendship. Social media is a way, and friends, in terms of Facebook, is a big issue today. Your whole identity based on who likes you or doesn't like you, and that's dangerous. And so we're going to see what is true friendship. What is true friendship? And I'm going to ask us at the end of this, who or what kind of friend are you? We've looked at Satan, who is an accuser, and I think a lot of us can identify with Satan. There are many churches I go, and sometimes the pastor, I'm going tomorrow to New England, to Maine and New Hampshire, Vermont, and so on. It's colder there, I think, right? It's cold outside today. Man, no encouragement in this. Okay, so it's very interesting when I think about this whole thing of friendship. It's so important to have people around you who have been faithful to you. And what kind of friend are you? I mean, there are a lot of churches I go to where pastors say, we have a problem with the leadership. So-and-so is a busybody. Or, they're just always accusing. They're always complaining, nitpicking. And I remind them that that's the name of Satan. He's the accuser of the brothers and sisters in the church. And we can join Satan. And I think of some people who are very much like that. They want to pick on issues all the time. Maybe you've identified with Job's wife, and there's someone in your family, in your situation, who's gone through so much suffering. You're like, I just can't wait for them to be relieved from that. Even if death is the doorway to a better place, then that's what I want from them. And whatever it takes, if cursing is going to actually cause God to take their life, then curse God and die. Get over with it. And it seems like she was heartless or challenging her husband's faith and integrity, but I don't think so. In that culture, I think that kind of a thing was a release and a relief from the idea of suffering and that punitive reason for suffering we're going to look at. I must say that the more I read, I often try to think, am I like Job? And I'm sure if you're like me, we read about the things that are happening to Job, you're like, yeah, I think that's happening to me. We tend to identify with the main character. But this week, something's happened to me, especially yesterday as I was putting these PowerPoints together. I had to ask the Lord to forgive me. I want to confess to you, I'm very much like this guy, Eliphaz. I feel because I was the eldest in my family, because I have some theological background compared to my other family members, because I'm the head of my household, because of professor of global theology, I tend to be like this guy. I want to confess to you, I had God to deal with my life. I've got all the answers for people, you know what I mean? Yeah, sometimes I can tell them what their problem can be solved before they even explain themselves. And I found myself this week, just saying, okay, Gnanakan, let the Lord deal with you. So I want to say this right off the bat. While I'm teaching this, I'm also allowing this to surgically deal with my own heart. And maybe you're like me, you've always been at the end where you tell people what to do. And by the way, you're qualified to do it. You feel you're the eldest, you have the right. You're the father, you're the mother. I mean, if you don't do it, who will? And I'm going to show you how this is so true with Eliphaz, our friend here. So as we go through this series, I want you to identify, are you like Bildad? And we'll come to him soon. Or Zophar, or maybe Elihu, the fourth guy who comes up. He's the young and restless guy, and then he knows all the answers. He doesn't know what the question is, but he got all the answers. People are like that. Maybe, you feel a little bit about the heart of God who questions the questioner in order to help them discover truth, who has a way of reflecting upon the sufferer, their own situation, and showing solidarity with those who are hurting in some way. So, it could be many, you see what I'm saying? It can be many characters in the story. I just caught myself saying, my goodness, I'm so much like this fellow. So anyway, let me begin by reading a few verses, and then we go straight into our text and see how we can do for time today. Turn to Job chapter 4. Job chapter 4 is a very, very interesting section, because Job now has spoken, and now he expects his friends to say something. But I like the way chapter 4 starts. And by the way, who starts? Eliphaz. Why Eliphaz? If you look at the board or in your notes, it's a culture, an ancient Near Eastern, well, actually even today in most cultures, and unfortunately it's only in the Western world with this individualism that we bypass this. But in many of us Chinese and Indian cultures, if I was in a room, even though I'm more educated, more resourceful, or maybe travel more, if I had my cousin who's older to me in the room sitting and somebody asked a question, I wouldn't be able to answer it till he said something, or he lets me, or he nods in my direction, then I speak. That's what I do when I'm in India. You ask Chinese people, you have Chinese friends, the guanche, the whole understanding of the older, the experienced, is the one who first goes. He goes first. So obviously Eliphaz must have had some kind of a seniority. And I would like to suggest he had seniority in three ways, not just in age, which he did, but also in terms of experience of life's hard knocks. He's been through the school of hard knocks. So he has the right to share. In many, many cultures, not just how many degrees you have after your name, it's how much of life experiences you've been able to handle and come through. And I think the third thing is he's got the wisdom of the tradition that Job belongs to, because he reminds Job, he says, remember Job, you know this, you consider this. You need to know this better because you remember what we do. So he has that one up on Job, so to say. So these could be some reasons. I put seniority comes first. And I think that's good in some cultures. One of my fears is in our postmodern culture, we're losing the sense of respect for that who is older or who's gone before us. And it does help. I love the Southern culture. Sometimes it embarrasses me when I'm in some places and they say, yes, sir, no, ma'am. Everything is like, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is really nice, Whereas here, some other places I go, it's like speak to the hand or something like what? Or hey, you with the face, and you're just worried about cultures like that. All right. Now, chapter 5, let me see, let me get this out. Job and chapter 5. Okay, this is very interesting how Job starts. Why is this not turning? Maybe it's, there you go. Eliphaz speaks, and he says something very interesting to Job. Oh my goodness, why is this not turning? Let me see. I don't know why my internet must be slightly different here compared to where I was last time, so it's not feeding. There you go. Now, I like verse, Eliphaz says, the Temanite, he said, now, can I have a word? Could I say something here, Job? Okay, 7 days silence, and now he says, after Job finishes lament and curses the day he was born, he says, okay, would you let me say something? Now, what do you think Job's going to say? Sorry, you can't say. I mean, it's obvious he's going to say, yeah, go ahead, make my day, or whatever, And I find the second part, he says, by the way, I can't hold it in, I've got to say it anyway. So it's like, why did you say that in the first place? Like, you asked for permission, and then you're like, I'm going to say it anyway. This kind of patronizing is very common in some cultures. And I don't know if you practice this. Some people have a one-up on something. They make sure. They kind of act like, but they're already going to say it anyway. You met people like that? So that's Eliphaz. Okay, I hope we're not like that. Now he says, he reminds Job, he says, think how you've been instructed, the many ways that you've been grown up. And I want you to see this. He says, you have. In fact, if you can underline, think how you have instructed many. How you have strengthened the feeble hands. Your words have supported those who have stumbled. You have strengthened faltering hands. That's verse 4. But now, trouble comes to you, and you're discouraged. It strikes you, and you're dismayed. Should you? Your piety, your integrity, your confidence, your blameless ways, your hope. Come on, he says, now figure this out, comprendo, consider this. Verse 7. Who being innocent has ever suffered or perished, he says. Where were their upright ever destroyed? Now he goes into empirical observation and he says, now you have sensed, you've seen this, okay, this is obvious. Those who plow evil, okay. Those who sow trouble, what do? Reap it. As the breath of God, they perish, and at the blast of his anger, they are no more. They're gone. And lions may roar and growl. Their teeth of the great lions are broken. The lion perishes for the lack of the prey, and the cubs of the lionesses are scattered. And then it says in verse 12, hey, a word was secretly brought to me. My ears caught the whisper of it. Amid quietening dreams in the night, when deep sleep falls on people, fear and tremble seized me and made all my bones shake. Now I like verse 15. And a spirit glided past my face. Can you sense that? So eerie, it's like, Harry Potter kind of a stuff, Spirit glided past my face, and my hair on my body stood on end. It stopped, but I could not tell what it was. A form stood before my eyes, and I heard this hushed voice. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? You can almost see this thing animating out of the text. You got to read like that so you can get the feel of what's going on, Can even a strong man be more pure than the Maker? The Spirit asks. If God places no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more would those who live in houses of clay? You're just mortal. You're just made out of clay, whose foundations are just dust, who are crushed more readily than a moth. You see that little thing? Just crush that thing. Then between dawn and dusk, they are broken into pieces. Unnoticed, they perish forever. They are not the cords of a tent. You just pull it out so that they die without any wisdom. It's a very interesting poetic rendition of Eliphaz. Now, let me say this. Whenever disaster strikes, one of the things that we as humans desire is why. Give me an explanation. For example, I'm thinking of any things that happen. It may be good, it may be bad, even maybe a accident on the road. Somebody came and crashed into a bumper. Like, hey, what happened? How did that happen? Which side of the road were you? Was that guy drunk? Were you speeding? The human curiosity says, how did that happen? Something bad happened. How did it happen? We get a diagnosis from the doctor. You go for your checkup and they say, wow, we just found out there's traces of something. You're like, how come that? Is that in my family history? Am I eating the right food? Or should I get more? How did that come? The human mind, particularly when there is a crisis, gets into the spirit of inquiry. Why? What's going on? What I want to show you in this whole section of Job and his three friends, there is this demand for what is the causative factor. Why is this happening? And that's very much part of human nature. Nothing wrong with that. God made us as rational beings who want to find out why. And so each of these friends begin their accusation, actually, by giving their own explanation why Job is suffering. Isn't that nice? When it's not happening to you, you can always tell people why it's happening to them. And I think part of the problem in Job's three friends is that they are listening with their ears, but not with their hearts. And I find myself all the time doing that. Because I think this is very important. I wrote here when I was just thinking over this passage that every time we are trying to communicate something, we can get so caught up with responding, even with our head, that we often lose heart when it comes to people. We want less to understand, but we want everybody to understand us. As Francis of Assisi prayed, help us more to understand rather than to be understood. And I think this is something that we will see with all the friends taking place. So let me comment on what we see on the board and what we have read so far. I want to show you that there's two philosophies here that are very similar to Eastern mysticism and Hindu philosophy. Now, before I tell you what that is, namely Hindu karma and Buddhist dharma, I want to show you, some of you know I spent some time researching for my PhD in Oxford in this whole area of suffering. When I see this echoed and even mirrored in their theology in this part. For example, Eliphaz says to him, he says, Job, you have come through so much of experience, you preach to others, it's time that you what? Preach to yourself. Or as the young people put it, if you can dish it out, what? You got to learn to take it in. And I think that's what he's implying. He says, Job, you know better than this. We are from the same tradition. You know what? Does the innocent suffer for nothing? No way. Doesn't God take care of it? Judgment comes. You're going to reap what you sow. And that principle is what we call a karma or karmic philosophy. Put it in another way, what goes around? Yeah, you sow. Even Galatians 6:7, you reap whatever you sow. And that's so true, Malachi. If you sow to yourself in righteousness, then you're going to reap in mercy. So this principle of sowing and reaping is almost mechanically used to give an explanation of why Job is suffering. I.e., in short, you are suffering because sometime you have sinned. You are reaping what you have sown. That kind of philosophy, or I would even say theology or thinking about God, is called retributive, or is it there? Okay, retributive theology. I try not to put all these fancy big words. Nobody really. Retributive theology means God is going to punish the wicked, and he always is going to bless those who are obedient. So blessing comes by obedience, implying that if you're suffering, you have disobeyed. So disobedience, form of sin, is what causes suffering. Now, many of us have either been told that, or we have told people that. I told you. It's going to get you sometime. Now you're reaping what you sowed. Now, the problem with retributive theology is when you talk about logic, you talk about the falsehood fallacy. Falsehood fallacy. A fallacy or fallacy of the either or category. And there are only two options. So if your sin, so the one side is sin and the other side is suffering. There's only two options, nothing else. So if you're suffering, it's directly because of sin, and if you sinned, you're going to suffer. It's a matter of time. There's nothing in between. There's no other explanation for why suffering. And you can see why this is a fallacy of the either or, and it's a fallacy of falsehood, because there are many reasons why people suffer, not necessarily and always only because they sin. Now, one of the questions I have for our discussion towards the end is, what are the other reasons people suffer, particularly when it comes to the righteous? Why is there undeserving suffering for the innocent? It is a big enigma today. So, God punishes the wicked, not the innocent. And the bottom line is, and by the way, no one is righteous. So if you're suffering, maybe because you're not righteous, except God. Now you can see how this actually is good theology in one sense. There is none righteous. Paul would say this in Romans. No, not one. All of us have sinned. So if we suffer, we can't say God is not fair, because all of us have fallen in this category that we've sinned. So we can never point a finger of God and say that's not fair. But the problem in this passage is the way the friends, without knowing Job's background or the cosmic encounter that has happened between Satan and God in heaven, are now not only presuming a few things, but judging Job's situation. That can happen. Now, the third thing is, if the first is called Hindu karma, in Hinduism, in a closed system of samsara, that is a worldview that's cyclic, we talk about karma. Karma is basically your deeds, good deeds and bad deeds. They kind of balance, and the effect and cause happens. You're born in a better life, or you go to a lower form based on your karma. It's influenced America so much that now we can check your credit karma. I mean, yeah, I'm serious. I'm not joking, isn't it? There's an app, Credit Karma, you can check it. Because that's so much of the influence of the philosophy. What you put in, you get out. The second philosophy is known as a Buddhist dharma. Dharma is the law of duty. And this is the second part where he says, listen, just deal with it. To exist is to experience suffering. And Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama, who is the founder of Buddhism, Buddha is not a name, it's a caption like Lord. He said, he had four noble truths. The first noble truth is existence is dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness. And he came up with this philosophy, and I know some people find Buddhist philosophy very difficult, but if you pay attention, it does have meaning within it. What he's saying, what he calls the dependent co-arising. In other words, as long as there is existence, there will be suffering. And one is dependent and gives rise to the other. Dependent co-arising is the theory. What Eliphaz is saying is, listen, Job, I mean, maybe that's why your wife wanted you to die, or, because as long as, just deal with it. Get on with it. It's part of our fate. You're here, you're suffering. But along with the experience and the explanation, each of these friends offers some kind of an escape. Okay, so what do I do about it? I like that. After the diagnosis, prognosis, okay, where's the cure? I mean, how do I get out of this stuff? And helpfully, Eliphaz does offer a cure. He seems to have known Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Not really, but the wisdom literature. He says, Job, you just got to trust the Lord. He's sovereign. Don't run away from him, just run to him. Seek him. Seek him. Come on, Job, you know this. Seek him. Turn to God. Don't let suffering get you to turn away from him. Turn to him in your suffering. Secondly, he says, God is reproving you. Take it. I mean, you're man enough. You're a big boy, Job. Take it. This is God's reproof. So here we have a second form of theology or an understanding of God as a parent, or more particularly Yahweh playing the role of the father. And a father, what does a father do? Whomever the Lord loves, he does what? Chastens. He says, this is part of your father's rod. You remember the proverb? Wickedness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it away. Or as the British little idiom says, spare the rod. Yeah, that's not in the Bible, but that's basically what he's saying. Just deal with it. Because you can't do that now in America. They call 911 and all that stuff, But I grew up, my goodness. My mom will say, let your dad come. And my dad always came. And he would take his belt. And with that weapon of mass destruction, he would belt me below the knees. And sometimes I get in trouble with school, and I belong to the British system, and in the 70s, they caned you. And they stretched your hand, took a ruler, and whacked you. And my father heard about it. Guess what? Part 2, when I came home. He never went and scolded the teacher like we do today. Why, what happened to my child? I just got the second helping when I came home from dad. And he would always say, son, this hurts me more than it hurts you. And I'm like, I don't think so. Well, that's basically Eliphaz. That's his experience from which he speaks. Secondly, that is explanation as to why Job is suffering. And his exit strategy. He says, listen, Job, turn to God, accept this as God's reproof, and just hold on. Wait, and God will restore you. Also, we talk about eschatological hope. It's another big fancy word which says the best is yet to come. And he gives, that's what suffering, present suffering is never pleasant, is it? But what sometimes helps is, okay, if I get through this, then there's hope. Better days are ahead. So do you all understand Eliphaz, what he's trying to, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what he's saying. And you know what? I've said that all the time. I still do it. I catch myself this last week saying, oh my goodness, here I am, Eliphaz again, telling people, turn to God. Just pray about it. It's going to get better. Just hold on. And this theology of hope, this sense of better days are going to come, is supposed to help people. Do you think it helps Job? All right. So there you go. Experience-based retribution theology, I think ultimately has two problems. Number one, it is heartless. Number two, it is what? A wrong diagnosis. It is almost assuming, or should I say presuming, Job hasn't turned to God. You see what I'm saying? Job, come on, turn to God. Well, what does that imply? That he's not. But as far as we know, and God knows, and God testifies, even to Satan, Job turned to God. He never lost his faith so far. So by telling him, you better turn around, go to God, giving him all this stuff, shows that sometimes, like Ephesians chapter, is it 4:15? Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15 is a very important verse. You can speak the truth and yet not speak it in. You've got to speak the truth in love. And I think he's doing a lot of truthful stuff, but he lacks love. And I wrote down here, when you are with broken-hearted friends, how do you heal the broken-hearted? Answer, not with logic, but with love. I think this is very important. When people are hurting, you don't bring a logical argument to them. You cover them with love. You embrace them. And the classic example for me is when Peter denies Jesus. Remember that 3 times? As Jesus told him he would. And not only that, he does something even worse. Jesus called him, said, follow me, I will make you what? Fishers of men. After he's denied Jesus 3 times, he feels so bad, he's wrecked his life. He says, you know what, I'm just worthless. But I'm good at one thing. What was it? What is Peter good at? Fishing. You know what he says? I'm going back what? And guess what all the other guys said? Let's go fishing. Jesus called them from fishing. Follow me. Leave the nets. I will make you fishers of men, not of fish. And Jesus comes to Peter. And you remember that? Walking on the water. He says, it's the Lord. And then they all pull that ashore. They obey him. They bring the fish in. They already find out Jesus had fish. He had cooked on that. And you remember that on the beach? That must be nice when Jesus fries fish for you. And he comes. You could imagine how Peter must have felt. And Jesus, what does he say to Peter? You dirty, rotten scoundrel, I told you. Is that what he says? I love the old King James, actually. He says, come and dine. Come and dine. Take a load off, Peter. Sit down. Put your head out. You want more fish? Try this bread. It's quite warm here. He feeds him. And after that, because he's toiled all night, physically, emotionally, he's drained out. never scolds Peter, never accuses him, doesn't say, I told you. He says, come and eat. That's what you need right now. And then when after the fire had died out, the fish is gone, the bread is gone, he looks at Peter and he says, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? He spoke the truth, but he spoke it in love. And he said, if you love me, then feed my sheep. You see how I'm treating you, Peter? That's how you must treat others. Peter does. He writes 1 Peter chapter 5. He gives a whole list of elders, a list of a requirement for elders. And you read that list. He got it from what Jesus did for him on the shore. What a friend we have in Jesus. So I can go on with these examples, but these are some places where you need to spend some time and allow these kind of encounters and exchanges between Job and Eliphaz and so on to help us to be. I want to be a better husband to Dorothy after I read this passage. I need to be more patient with my two daughters. I mean, they'll say, Dad, you're okay. Or if I go and ask them, how can I be patient? They're like, are you all right? You're okay. Just don't, my daughters don't like me, they'll become fussy with them. They're like, it's okay, Dad. But I think it's good for me to stop and ask, how do I treat my colleagues at work? Do I listen just with my ears and head or with my heart? Do I feel and sometimes just be there for them? I don't have to say anything. Any questions so far with the three aspects? But each of those friends will come up with different aspects. Before going to Job's response, and I know I'm hurrying a little bit in the next two chapters, but is there any questions so far, 4 and 5? Do you get the drift of what's happening? Eliphaz, how he enters into Job's experience, what he says, the rational explanation he gives. Now, I want to say one more thing about Eliphaz. On what basis did he say this? That helped me this week preparing for this class. What is the grounds of his theology? When you study theology or what you believe, why do you believe that etymologically? Where do you get your source? Well, I think his first source is actually a very reliable source. It is how God has acted through history, tradition. And he reminds Job, you know this. Consider this. You remember, Job, how this happened, how you gave to the poor. You were a missionary, Job, because we knew God is our justifying God. And I love that way he appeals to God's faithfulness over tradition. I think tradition can be a great teacher if we're willing to learn from good tradition. We live in a time when, in postmodernity, particularly with our millennials, the people I'm working with, or maybe now they call them Gen Z, they just don't care for tradition. They're like, that's old-fashioned. We don't do that anymore. You know what? We never learn. History what? Tends to do what? Repeat itself. Why? Because we never learn from it. But that tradition is based and appealed on good reasoning. And I like this. So there's number one, his source is tradition. Job, you remember, you and I are part of this theology. We are both patriarchs, right? Patriots or patriarchs? No, patriarchs, okay. I'm thinking of football. All right, so we're like, we you like Tom Bradley? Okay. So anyway, we are patriarchs. We belong to this stuff. Let's base it on it. But notice he doesn't disengage reason. Did you see the word consider this? Comprendo. Think about this, Job. Would God do that? Is that our God? He doesn't say, listen, we've always do it, just do it. He says, think about it. Is that how God works? You know God's not going to hurt the innocent. That's not Yahweh. I like that kind of appeal. In fact, I warm up to people who don't say, we've always done this. They say, listen, you remember why we did what we did and how that worked out? So let's stick with that. But there's a third source that honestly I'm not comfortable with. And don't get me wrong, I do believe in charismatic gifts, in esoteric experiences. I'm not against it. But I may be wrong, but this other part I read to you, I have some serious doubts whether that was the Holy Spirit or God speaking. I'll tell you why. Okay, you remember that he says he not only says this is our tradition, how God has worked. Number one. Secondly, think about it. Logically see how God has to work because he's consistent. He says, one night I had this dreadful dream, and this eerie spirit came by. It snuck up on me, and then it said to me. And what it said was nothing wrong. But I just wonder, if you study the Old Testament, some of you know what I'm talking about, God's revelation didn't come with an eerie, esoteric spirit. The prophet said, thus saith the Lord. The word of the Lord came to so-and-so saying. It wasn't this like, I don't know, let me see how, I was scared. The Holy Spirit, the God is not, 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7, isn't it? God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of, and a. So that makes me wonder, I may be wrong, that makes me wonder whether, someone said that Satan leaves Job and never comes back again. That's true. I mean, he's not mentioned explicitly after chapter 2, Satan's gone. But I wonder, Satan is working still in these kind of early things which creates this suspicion. And this is, I'm going to be careful how I say this. What Satan could not do to Job, his friends are now beginning to accomplish. I find that very interesting. And this is scary when you think about it. Satan could not touch Job. You remember that? He said, you do this. You watch and see. He'll curse you and he'll die. He'll curse you to your face, Yahweh. And God says, go ahead, make my day. He's not going to do that. And then you remember, he leaves him. But has he really left him? Or is he working through the Spirit? Sometimes I think our foes from within are worse than the foes from without. Because the foes from without, our enemies from the, we're like God, I got to be careful. But who expects your friends to do that? I mean, the enemies can come and they pierce you with the sword, but a friend who stabs you at the back, that's what's scary. Does that make sense? And that's why this week I need to ask myself beyond, I tend to be like Eliphaz, but I hope I don't act like him. There's another reason why I have concern about this. It's not that his experience is not genuine. Please don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm Baptist-Costal, trust me. But I am concerned when I take my experience and use my personal subjective experience to become normative for somebody else. That's the problem I have. Does it make sense? It's not that God can't speak to you and you speak in tongues, knock yourself out, that's good. But when you say you also have to speak in tongues if you're really spiritual, now that's what bothers me. Does it make sense? If God heals me, if God came and told me, gave me the assurance, Chris, tomorrow when you go to Maine, it's going to shine and everything's going to be great. If I went and told my wife that, listen what God told me, and you need to hang the clothes out to dry, that's problematic. Does this make sense? So think about it. This is just my own reflection about that spirit, eerie spirit that comes and said to me, and Job, you need to know this is why it's happening to you, because it brings the worst out of Job. I think the Holy Spirit always brings the best out of us. That's how I discern the Spirit. Does it make sense? I think it's very important theologically to think about suffering and the theology for it. Okay, let me look at Job's response quickly, and we'll have some time for discussion. So Job has hit rock bottom. I won't describe what rock bottom means because you can read it there. It's pretty gross. The pus is really exploding in his body, and maggots are eating it. Okay, so enough said. So what happens? What happens? He's disgusted, but in the midst of that, he's enraged. He's mad. And you can see he's turning his anger towards God. He's just disgusted with his friends, but he's really now upset with God. Okay, God, you took my family, You took my possessions. I said, you gave, you take away, I blessed your name. You allowed my body to be infected with this pus, and now maggots are kind of breeding on it. That's hitting rock bottom. And he says, God, I just can't keep quiet again. And to rub salt into my wounds, I've got these three guys. And number one, round one is over with this guy. By the way, there's 3 cycles. This is just the first cycle with the first guy. So Job is impatient for several reasons. He says, nobody shares in my suffering. Instead of talking and letting your words cut me, why don't you share and listen to my pain with your heart? He goes on to say, God, just leave me alone. Just let me be. I don't want any favor from you. I don't even need any explanation for right now because these guys are giving it to me. Just let me be. Because every time I think about who you are, your character, and who I am and what I'm experiencing, it does not dovetail. It doesn't mesh. It's making me mad. Just leave me alone. I just want you out of my life. I want you out of my thoughts. Do you know how many people come to that stage? They have a crisis of call, which ends up with a crisis of faith. And they just give up. He actually wants to be obliviated. Nirvana is what the Buddhists call it. You know what nirvana is? To be blasted into oblivion. They take drugs if they need to, but just go into a place where you don't feel nothing. Or you feel nothing, sorry. So now, Job is accused. Here's the bottom line if you read chapters 4 and 5, 6 and 7. Job is saying, all right, let me say 2 things, Job. The bottom line is Job is saying, all right, Eliphaz, are you done? Are you finished accusing me? Have you finished explaining why I'm suffering? Have you finished telling me what I should do, turn to God and wait and hope and all? Have you finished your stuff? Okay, let me say 2 things. The first thing I want to say, Eliphaz, do you want me to, I say fess up or confess something that I've not done? Now, what Job is doing, he is drawing from the pagan tradition. In pagan tradition, and I come from Hinduism in India, to appease the god, you manipulate the powers and get what you want from them. So you can do whatever you want, and somehow you give an offering, or you cheat, or you do something else, or even sell your soul to the Satan, so that you get something in return. So Job's point is this. He says, is that Yahweh? Is that our God? Is he pagan that I should just simply confess even though I know I've not done something wrong so that he could just do what I want or just do what I need from him? And Job says, listen, I am not going to do that. You know why? Because my God is not a pagan God who wants me to just use these twisted ways to somehow make him happy so he can give me what I want. Do you all get this argument? It's very important. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it's important. Today we have Christians, televangelists. We have people who are in churches who say, listen, if you do this, this, and this, I think God's going to give you what you want. That is not trusting God. That's manipulating him. And Job says, I don't want to confess something that is not true. Why? Because Yahweh is not a pagan God whom I can kind of coerce and manipulate and twist. He's sovereign. And he says, I don't want to do that. The second appeal, I think, is even more powerful. If you read chapter 8, he says, all right, I'll tell you one more thing. I have not sinned. I maintain my integrity, my tham. I still fear God. And I have faith in him. Even if he slays me, I'm going to trust him. But here's my point. Okay, suppose I've sinned in a way that I am not aware of. Okay, why can't God forgive me? Okay, God, forgive me and take away this pain from me. If my problem is sin, I'll confess it. Then and take away suffering from my life. So I think many of us have gone through these 2 stages at different intensities and times because we want to appease God. Say, God, prayed like I often do. Lord, maybe I've sinned in word and deed, but maybe in thought. I don't know what. What is he saying? It's the New Testament gospel version of, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. There may be something, Lord, just help me out. Again, honestly, I love Job's spirit at this stage. His disposition is very, very instructive for us. And I think in any relationship, particularly between husband and wife, more so between siblings, I know of people, I have a brother who has not forgiven my other brother, I think for 7 or 8 years since dad died. And I don't want to go into the details, but again, we don't, right now, nobody knows whose fault it is. But the point is, they still don't get along with each other. I get along with both of them. You know why? I go to them, Ryan, I'm so sorry. I don't care whose fault it is. I'm so sorry. You seem to be looking at me funny today, Ryan. I don't know what I did. Is something I didn't do, maybe. I take the initiative and go to something because I think that's Christ-like. I learned this from Job. Actually, I learned that from Jesus. Jesus said, listen, if you bring your offering to the altar and you find out that someone else has done something to you, what does he say? Leave your offering. They've done something to you. You're like, let them come to me. No. Jesus said, you go to. No, you take the higher road. You take the higher road. And maybe you're here in this evening and you've looked at this whole situation. You've seen Job's suffering, and Job said, listen, Lord, I believe, but even if I messed up, help my unbelief. Forgive me. Yeah. So think about that. Okay. We have some time for questions. Thank you for listening. It's not an easy passage with all this theology stuff, but I hope you don't mind a little bit of dosage on this because it will come. Trust me. There's going to be times in our Christian life that we're going to be very bewildered. And we better have a solid theology in understanding the character of God, particularly in times of crisis. It's so important.